Hello and welcome to Recap Radio. I'm Diego Cupolo, editor-in-chief of Turkey Recap, and this is our live show about Turkish politics and foreign policy. Today I'm talking to Karolina Wanda Olszowska, president and co-founder of the Institute of Turkish Studies in Poland, and also Karol Wasilewski, head of the Turkey, Caucasus, and Central Asia Department at the Center for Eastern Studies, also known as OSW, which is also in Poland. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
So, in this webcast, we're going to talk about Russian disinformation in Turkish media, its impacts, and what can be done about it as the Ukraine war continues to dominate regional and global headlines. We aim to talk about 30 to 40 minutes and welcome questions from the live audience. To get into it, the full-scale war in Ukraine is approaching its fourth year. EU leaders will hold a summit tomorrow in Brussels to work on a ceasefire deal or at least security guarantees for Kyiv. At the same time, Russian state narratives have been filling our news streams since the Ukraine war really began in 2014 and long before that, right? The whole Cold War. I'd argue that social media is at least partially responsible for normalizing disinformation because all posts on social platforms look the same. They're presented as equal, and it doesn't matter who's posting them. They look the same, right? On TikTok or wherever you're getting your news from CNN or Russia Today, it mixes together. To set the scene for this podcast, everybody's heard about Russia and disinformation campaigns for a long time now. You both are monitoring the impacts specifically in Turkey and Poland. When we met in Ankara recently, you said that your monitoring work was super important and should have started a long time ago. Can you explain what you meant by that?
I want to start to say that our project is mainly focused on the topic of how the Russian disinformation presents Poland and the topic related to Poland and the Central Europe in the media in Turkey and in the Middle East. So in the Polish point of view, I think this is very important because this is a point of our security. This is point of how the Russian disinformation present us and how the people in this country think about Poland and the Polish point of view, Polish situation. And I think that many European leaders forgot that in the different part of the world, like the South Global, for example, people look different for the Russia. It's not like in Poland that say that something is for TASS or the Sputnik, and you think, no, this is the Russian narration. You should check in or look for it deeper. Generally, in the many places is different, and for the Western country, they look for the distrust. Yeah. So I think we should do this earlier because this is important for Poland to know how Poland is portrayed and can respond for it. Not only to know, but to respond and to do something in our way, not to disinformation, but I don't know, to check, to send the information, to try to talk about our point of view and information that is important for us.
And for context, Poland is very, not pro-Russia. How can I say it? It's portrayed as Go ahead, Karol.
We call it we are Russo realistic. This is how we call it. And to add a few points to what Karolina have already said. So generally speaking, Russian disinformation has been very active since the beginning of Russian, I should say, re-aggression of Ukraine in 2022. And it adds some really strong messages directed to the so-called global South countries, depicting Russia, a country that is an aggressor in this war, depicting Russia as a kind of, country that fight against so-called Western imperialism, to, hitting some sensitivities that are already present in the global South countries. It was basically designed at, minimizing the possibility that the global South countries will be in any way empathetic towards Ukraine. So this is why we mentioned that the project should have started some time ago, because these narratives have been present and they are with us since the very first day of the war, heavily impacting the image of Russia and the Russo-Ukraine war in the global south, and of course also in Turkey, unfortunately.
Mhm. And your reports, which I'll link to in the show notes when we post this afterwards, they're excellent in outlining the different language operations that Moscow-friendly media runs in different countries and different, let's say, influence areas around the world. You also highlight that the overall goal is to exploit news events to fuel anti-Western sentiments, specifically in Turkey. Uh, in your research, you specifically highlighted the Quran burning event in front of the Turkey's embassy in Sweden during Sweden's NATO accession process, which was heavily highlighted by Russian media outlets in Turkey here and Turkish language outlets. So, which outlets in Turkey spread the most Russian narratives?
I think this question is easy and hard in the same time, because in Turkey you have the Sputnik Türkiye, and of course this is the medium, the Russian medium who have the Russian narration about all things, yeah, because the Russia pay money, and this is a big money for the Russian media in many language. And of course, this is not like, I don't want to say that all article in the Sputnik Türkiye is pro-Russia or disinformation, or the different one, because sometimes it's a Russian narration, sometimes disinformation, sometimes it's manipulation, sometimes they didn't add some important things, or they change the word, like they said, regime in Kiev, yeah, to say that legitimate the government in Ukraine. So this is not like the all article in the Sputnik Türkiye is like this. Many of them is very good article for about the situation over the world. And I don't want to say, and we try to don't this in our report, because we try to don't put the names of the journalists in our report, because this is not our point. We don't want to say that this journalist, to share the lies or the Russian narration. Because many of them are very good journalists with very good CV, and they do their job. But some of the articles, sometimes it's without the names. They spread the information. Sometimes this is information without any context, for example, and if you, because the good disinformation is always very near to the truth. You need to have not less than 40% of lie when you want to do something good. Is excellent is 90% of true and 10% of disinformation, because the people need to be sure that this is the good text. Sometimes when I read the article in Sputnik in a different language, in Turkish, in Arabic and Persian, I don't want to sure for the first time where is the disinformation. And for example, I gave one example about the. I am a historian anthropologist, so the topic related to history was very important for me, because Russia in Poland and in the country in our part of Europe generally use the history, the Second World War history, to change our point of view for the history, to say that this Soviet Union was always against the Nazi German. No, they cooperate. And the Soviet Union attacked Poland in the same time that Nazi German. And I look for the different article related to history. In Sputnik in Persia, I think, was article about Wojtek the Bear. Bear, like the Polish soldier who was in Iran. They found the small bear without the mother, and they take care about him. And he traveled with them from Iran to Italy and fight in the different battle during the Second World War. And this is true. This is true that this soldier was in the Soviet Union, and they can go to the Iran and later go to this way to fight. But in this text, we didn't have any information that this Polish soldier was in Soviet Union in war camps in lager. Because they was Poles, because this is not prisoners, they was Poles and they was in the war camp, and many of them died during this. And the Stalin said, okay, they can go and fight, because this was the time after the Nazi German attacked Soviet Union, and they need two people to fight to the different front. So, this is not the article who are not the truth. This is article that you miss some information. And when you miss some information, you don't understand the background. And if you know historian who are focused for the history, and especially for the Polish history, because I think many very good historian who look for the different topic or not know much about the Polish history during the Second World War, don't know that this is small change all background and all view about this. So I think this is the point that that Sputnik is very hard to watch and to understand where's the disinformation. Maybe Karol adds to something for it, and if not, I add something additional.
Yeah, so what Russia is really extremely skillful in is adapting to local sensitivities. And this is the first thing that absolutely should be said. So this is why when you, for example, search or look through the reports that were published based on the research project by the Institute for Turkish Studies, you will be able to notice that Russia uses different language, different narrative lines, very often different tools, while it speaks to, I don't know, Algeria, to Lebanon audience, to the audience in Iraq, Iran, or in Turkey. And this is the first thing. And this is also why it is really difficult to point directly sometimes and say that this is purely an disinformation. Because again, it is using some sensitivities. Yeah. So it is basing its narratives very often on narrative lines or sometimes feelings. And the feelings are the most important, because this information is based on emotions that are already visible in society. And it's using this emotion to build up these narrative lines that is later on disinformation. Secondly, another thing is that oftentimes people think that the goal of Russian disinformation is very simple. And we would call it to make Russia image great again. It's not that simple. And this is also highly problematic because the goal of disinformation, as Karolina said when she was speaking about this, being close enough to the truth, the goal of the disinformation is for people to doubt every information, to doubt every information to the extent that you, as a person who is prone to this information, you start to think that establishing the truth is always almost impossible. Yeah. And this is why we have these reoccurring themes in social media of, European countries, Middle Eastern countries, and so on, saying that can states be trusted? Do you really, is it really helpful to believe in official narrative of government? And interestingly, for example, in Poland, you could have noticed that some accounts that spread such a disinformation during the pandemic, yeah, and for example, during the pandemics, they were, showing this disinformation that led people to question all the messaging that came from official governments. Suddenly, after the Russian aggression on Ukraine started, these accounts started spreading anti-Ukrainian things and pro-Russian things. Yeah. So once again, the goal of disinformation, and this is why it sometimes makes it really difficult to tell whether this is disinformation or not. It's not propaganda. It's not about making Russia's image great again. The goal is to stop confusion, play along the sensitive lines that are already present in societies, basically for people to question every source and to doubt later on every policy that may be effective to a country. this is where Russia is extremely successful, if it achieves this stance of cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, and I try to add something about this different narration, because we see the different narration in our report. For example, we have many information about the Ukrainians who are training the terrorists in the different part of the war, or they send the weapon. And for example, in Turkish, in the 1 year ago, when Assad was fallen, we had that Ukrainians sent the weapon to HTS to support the opposition and support
But
terrorists.
Ukraine, just to clarify, there was news in Turkey that said Ukraine was sending weapons to HTS, right? That's what
Yes,
you're saying.
yes. But in Israel, in Hebrew, we have the same information, but the Ukrainians sent the weapon for Hamas. In Africa, we have the same information. The Ukrainians sent the weapon, but for the different organization, terrorist organization in Mali, I think. So this is connecting to the narratives to the different nation, and I am sure, because when we were in Turkey, many people said that in Sputnik in Turkish, they didn't have information to criticize Turkish politics. When they look for Deutsche Welle or BBC in Turkish, generally they have the narration sometimes criticize the domestic politic of Turkey. But in Sputnik, no. But I am sure that in the different language, they have this criticized. I think I don't know how is in Greek now, because in the European Union the Sputnik was closed in the when the full scale of war in the Ukraine started. But I'm sure that in Armenian language will be the same. I don't have time to look for many articles, but in some about history, it's many topic when about the Armenian genocide in Ottoman Empire. So in Armenian, is. In Turkish, no. So I think this is very important to understand, that maybe in the different media, these media criticize Turkish domestic politics, but if in Sputnik, no, it could be only in Turkish. In the different language, could be very different.
It sounds like a very difficult job what you're doing. And just to elaborate on one of the points you made about bringing on respected journalists and not wanting to name them, I understand. But this is part of the strategy, right? Is getting trusted journalists to come and give normal daily news. But like you said, most of it is going to be straight news. And then there's that 5 or 10% twist, maybe why a protest is happening or why an event happened. We'll get into the details about the specific research you did. I just want to ask, before going deeper, can we focus on Sputnik Türkiye? Because I feel like this is an easy place to start. There was an Economist article in 2019 saying that Sputnik Türkiye has some respect in Turkish audiences because it's less censored than the other Turkish media. What role does Sputnik Türkiye play today as we're discussing Ukraine's future in Turkey? Or are you picking up on any narratives specifically from that site and outlet?
Yes, it's many narrative related to that in Ukraine fight the Nazi, and the Russian fight in the Ukraine with the Nazi, and the regime in Kiev. That's not the government, but something different. And it's many narration about that Ukrainians who rape, who kill the Russian people. It's many narration about Poland related to Ukrainian war. That's Poland with some countries, and this depend of the article and depend of the language. Sometimes with German, France, the UK, Romania, and Hungary, they want divided the territory of the Ukraine. And the proof of this should be that we talk about the former eastern borderline. That former, we said the eastern borderline, that the part of the western Ukraine now is the Ukraine, but in the past was the part of the Poland before the end of the Second World War, we talk in Polish like Kresy Wschodnie, the eastern borderline, but this is not that former eastern borderline. Not to say that we want to this part of Ukraine, but this is the proof of this article that we want to divide the territory of the Ukraine, and that's Polish soldiers fight in Ukraine and they kill people to rape the women and so on. So it's many narration like this. And I think that if I look for the different country in the Central and Eastern Europe, the much article is about the Ukraine and the war in the Ukraine, and many article connected to Poland, because sometimes I use the keywords like Polonia in this article. So many of them is not only about Poland, but in Poland in the Ukraine war. So it's many narration like this, and many of them don't have the name of the journalist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so to add a few things, you asked about specifically about Sputnik Türkiye's role. So, first of all, yeah, I think it needs to be clarified and underlined. I mean, your argument about the business model, the essence of this business model, as using journalists that are respected also in Turkey, and again, that sometimes provide quality journalism, aims the very basic goal to whitewash some narratives that later on are pushed through Turkish media. Since Sputnik Turkey is considered a reliable source of information, which, well, I have this anecdotal evidence that when I came to Turkey in 2015, I specifically remember this conversation with my a friend who was a journalist back then, and I was absolutely surprised because she was thinking of Sputnik Turkey as a reliable source, and I was like, oh my gosh, why is that? And then I understood that this is a actually very clever model to whitewash some informations that later get on to Turkish infosphere. So the narratives that Karolina mentioned upon, like for example the Kiev regime, which is Russia's way of delegitimizing Ukrainian government. Yeah, they are just interested in the fact that more and more sources will repeat the phrase and will speak of Ukrainian government as a Kiev regime because it leads to a state of, again, cognitive dissonance. Yeah, you repeat this phrase, and suddenly you don't remember anymore that this is a government that has been legitimately voted by the people. Yeah, so this is one part of the business model. I mean, whitewashing the information. The second is they depend on the information that are later encircled by Turkish media, and oftentimes Sputnik Turkey is quoted. Well, I would say directly, because here is the moment where we should probably start speaking about Turkish domestic media landscape. And Turkish, of course, domestic media landscape is, on the one hand, unique to an extent because, well, basically, the fact that these journalists were looking job and found it at Sputnik Turkey was because they were purged from media. But they are also, they are also prone to, I would say, universal problems of the media landscape. So, for example, as we heard from Turkish journalists, journalists are sometimes lazy. So this is why they go with reprints. And if you reprint these narratives, like Karolina mentioned about HTS that was supposedly supported by Ukrainian governments and this was an offshoot of the narrative directed to Africa that were supporting jihadists all around the world. The goal is accomplished. Yeah. So, secondly, what is extremely worrying in Turkish media landscape is that the journalists oftentimes do not have this instinct to verify information. So when you started this podcast with asking questions, what we can do about that is, and our thinking in the project was that one of the most important things, apart from, the most obvious recommendation, education, critical thinking, and so on, as you know, already saying something that it reminds of a drinking game. Yeah. Every project ends with, education and critical thinking recommendation, but a very basic and a very important, in my opinion, recommendation would be to give Turkish journalists some tools for them to have the instinct to verify the information, to even pose a question. Is it a information or is it disinformation? Because if they don't have tools, if they don't have this instinct, they won't certainly use it. If they have, they will be equipped with such tools, they will at least have a choice. Yeah. And maybe this is something that could make a situation a little better. Sorry, I covered so many topics in one short
No, thank you.
intervention, but
Thank you. Did you have something to add, Karolina?
Yes, because it's not. We talk about Sputnik Türkiye generally, but this is not only the Sputnik. This is the very many smaller media who do something like copy paste all article in Sputnik. And when you look for Google for some topic, you can see the 15 articles, the same article to copy paste by Sputnik, but the different media. And why, if you don't know nothing about this topic, you don't think that this is true. Yeah. So this is that we have the many smaller media who trust Sputnik and copy paste with them. And of course the situation that's in Turkey, we have the many place when Russia can talk about the narration. For example, one interview with Sergei Lavrov, I think 2 years ago in Hurriyet. Very good interview about the Turkish-Russian relations. But they have the one line about the Turkey sold the weapon for regime in Kiev, and with this weapon they killed the Russian civilians and military staff. And people in Turkey, the journalist, was very, I don't know, angry about this words, because this is not like they said, okay, this is true, but they was angry and they repost this one line. And when people read it, they remember this line, remember that Kiev regime in Kiev, and they kill the Russian civilians, not the Russian kill the Ukrainian civilians. And the same was in Antalya Diplomacy Forum, that Lavrov have the speaking there. It's for very good performance, if I can be true, because I was there, and this room was not so big, so you feel that many people want to be in the meeting of Lavrov, and they said the same, that they want to protect the Russian speaking people in Ukraine. The same narration that everywhere, and the people in the different parts of the world can hear it. And I remember one journalist from China, he said that this place is very good to hear the two point of view, the Ukrainians and the Russians. In Poland, we don't have the two point of view. We know that, we know that in this case, in the war of the Ukraine, should be only one point of view. But the problem was the additional problem that I think only one president in the European country, that the European Union countries, was in this Antalya Diplomacy Forum because of many things, like this was after the arrest of Ekrem İmamoğlu and so on. But this was the problem, that we don't have the different than Ukrainian European voice to say that what said the Lavrov is the Russian narration, disinformation, lies, the bullshit, if I can say like this.
Of course.
Yeah, but may I add something? Because this is a very, very good point Karolina mentioned about this fake balance that when we speak about Turkey is especially visible in. Yeah. So, of course, in Institute for Turkey Studies, we together with Karolina prepared this report on Russian disinformation in Turkey, which depicts the main narrative lines and schemes and so on and so on. But Karolina, together with Justyna Oszust, who is an analyst also at the Institute for Turkey Studies, prepared another report on Russian drones incursions into Polish airspace. And honestly speaking, this is a wonderful, wonderful report. I can pay some compliments because I was not part of this report. So I'm just paying compliments to my fellow analysts. But why is it so important? So first of all, drone incident. What happened? So in the beginning of September, some Russian drones made an incursion into Polish airspace. They were shot down, especially those drones that were marked as armed. And NATO reacted very swiftly. And Poland was really happy with this reaction. Take under consideration the moment and some, let's say, a very delicate situation when assessing the possible reaction of Donald Trump. Yeah. So Poland was extremely happy that NATO reacted so swiftly. And suddenly, Russia, at the time of crisis, initiated a disinformation campaign also in Turkey. So in Turkey, you had lots of articles about what happened, articles that were kind of similar to Russian disinformation all over the space in Europe and other countries. So this was disinformation saying that, oh my gosh, was that really an incursion? Were that really Russian drones? How would it be possible, technically possible, for these drones to go that far? Poland is irrational country. Look, this is just a minor incident. This might have been Ukrainian drones, etc., etc. Yeah, but at the same time, they also introduced some narrative lines that were directed precisely or dedicated, I should say, solely to Turkey. Narrative lines. Look, the first one is that NATO didn't help Poland, which you already know it's not true. Yeah. Second narrative line. Look, NATO, when some minor incident happened, rushed to Poland help. What did they do in 2015? Yeah. And the third narrative line was that, look, NATO is helping Poland, but it's not helping Palestinian people. Look at the hypocrisy here. Yeah. So these three narrative lines that were dedicated to Turkey, and they, again, I mentioned that they are really skillful at playing on local sensitivities. They really skillfully played at local sensitivities. But at the same time, we are very often asked about the effectiveness of these disinformation campaigns, which is really, really difficult to measure, taking under consideration the fact that some emotions, like, for example, Turkey anti-Western sentiments, are already there and have been here for quite some time. And taking under consideration that some Western real political failures towards Turkey contributed also to these anti-Western sentiments. But then you have this wonderful picture in which, after the drone incident, you have cyberspace flooded with Russian disinformation, and then you have this fake balance, which is presented in Turkish by Turkish media. Because what is the simplest case? The simplest possibility to play with this news is NATO said that, Russia said that. This is NATO communique. This is Russia's communique. Yeah. And this is something that was really, really, I recommend reading this report, visible in Turkish media landscape. And here, Russia was very successful because in NATO country, we didn't have this narrative that was, explaining or sorting out Russian disinformation narratives, like, for example, saying that it was indeed possible for these drones to go that far into Polish airspace because of this and that. These were Russian drones, and the proof is this and that. They were shot down swiftly by NATO, and here is an evidence. Yeah? Again, this is a NATO country. And in this country, we had this fake balance. NATO says that. Russia says that. Poland says that. Russia says that. Polish foreign minister says that. Lavrov says something like that. So if you ask me whether it is effective, I would say, yeah, they absolutely accomplished their goals. The, again, media space was flooded with narratives that were boosting Russia's goals, were showing confusion, were not clarifying the reality. But they were playing against sensitivities, showing confusion.
Yeah, and I'll link to these reports that you're mentioning in the post afterwards for everybody listening. You've covered a lot of the questions I had, so I'm going to skip through some. Um, can you provide examples, because you're both Polish, you come to Turkey on a regular basis, I assume. Do you get the sense from people that you talk to here that this information lines are penetrating the way they think? Because as you put it in your reports, Russia tries to portray Poland as very aggressive, Russia-phobic, and just wants to escalate the war in Ukraine irresponsibly, right? Do you feel on a person-to-person level that this stuff is breaking through, or do you see that people are skeptical?
No, I don't feel that that people in Turkey they think like that about Poland, but this is not only the case. I remember when I talk with my friends. He is Turks, but he's the journalist and he work in the like a correspondent and very good international company. And he spent many years in abroad. They know several foreign language, and he was in Ukraine when the full-scale war started, and he said, "What is the Polish problem? Because the Ukraine is the region of influence of Russia, so Russia wants to have that's part of influence. So if you gave Ukraine, you will be free because you are in NATO, and the Russia don't want to have the war with NATO. And if someone who are well educated, who know the different language, can read the different text in the different language, and is a journalist, so need to check many information. And he was in Ukraine, he was in Poland, in Przemyśl, when the full-scale war of Ukraine started, and the Polish people helped the Ukrainian people, said something like this. What I should say, I think this is like this. It's not like I feel that Turkish people don't like Poles. No, I think that they like us so much, and we have the good connection, and we talk many times about history and so on. But in this important for Polish security point, we have the problem, because it's not problem to feels to Poland. This is a problem to feels to this topic related to our security.
Yeah, first of all, we're at a very unique situation in which we both, me and Karolina, we usually meet people who are, well, in the known when it comes to let's say, international affairs. But still, it sometimes happens that, well, I wouldn't say people question Poland's stance and don't understand Poland's security policy. So when I've been meeting Turks for the last year, all of them have been speaking of Poland as a country that has been rightfully interested in its security, and thus it's increasing its spending and so on. But at the same time, I'm still meeting. It's from time to time it happens that there is a person, sometimes even analysts. This is of course anecdotal evidence, but I know at least one former government employee that is basically, I would say, brainwashed by Russia. So he, when speaking to me, he was, for example, questioning what happened in Bucha. Yeah, and he was repeating all these Russian lines that all these dead bodies were, well, delivered by the Ukrainians there. Yeah, but this is just an anecdotal evidence. But sometimes, and this is a problem, when we have people that basically, and again, it doesn't happen very often, but from time to time, I still get the question from Turkey analysts, but what's all the fuss with Russia? Well, they are just doing their job. Why are you so worried with Russia? Are you really worried with do you think that Putin, for example, they say, was is serious when he says that no NATO in Poland? Yeah, do you think he's serious? Yeah, we think he's serious, basically speaking, because precisely since 2008, since his infamous Munich speech, he has been delivering on his promises. And, it's, to me, of course, I'm a Russo realistic, I'm a Pole, but this is just, well, at Munich, he basically announced what he would do. Yeah. And so this is a part of the plan, and I have to, as a Pole, treat this seriously. So from time to time, again, it happens that some people buy this Russian narrative that Russia feels threatened by NATO, that it wants to have its own sphere of influence, that we should be supportive of that, and so on. But the biggest problem is that what we mentioned, that at time of crisis, Russia is successful in flooding Turkish media landscape with its point of view being unchallenged. And I think this is a huge problem, because if we as NATO, and Turkey is of course a part of NATO, want to communicate our stance, if we want to, deliver our point of view and explain the situation better, this is an extremely difficult task under such circumstances. Yeah. So I would say that this is the point that, very oftentimes Turks say that we shouldn't be worried, because they usually say that, for example, that Russia has been an enemy for such a long time. We have had so many wars. We have our own problems. Nobody would buy Russian propaganda or narrative. You should be, completely peaceful about that. But then again, you have this situation of crisis, which shows us a different picture, which tells us that Russia is extremely, again, successful in penetrating media landscape at a time of crisis. And they feel they are playing the long game. And their long game is to weaken the bond between Turkey and the West, to do it on every opportunity. They know it won't happen like that they will publish some narrative and Turks will think like, oh my gosh, NATO is so bad that we have to withdraw. No, but they are playing the long game, hoping that at one time they will have this, qualifying majority of the Turks that claim that, oh my gosh, NATO is so unhelpful to Turkish interests. It is so rotten. It is brain dead, that we should be thinking of, our basically membership in NATO. But secondly, that at a time of crisis, and this is the most important thing and most problematic for now, is a time of crisis, this cognitive dissonance would be such that at least Turkish society won't put a pressure on Turkish decision makers on whether Turkey should support its ally as Poland or not. Yeah. And this is, to us, this is a problematic situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we went over time, but I'll ask one more question. And I really could talk about this all day, but we should respect everybody's time. Ukraine war is going to remain in the headlines. The U.S. is pulling back, right, from the European sphere. At the same time, we have NATO chief, the NATO chief and the British intelligence chief recently saying that Russia is a clear and present danger to European security. So, looking ahead, what can be done to counter these disinformation efforts, apart from what you've already stated? And my personal question, how do people deal with information overload? Because I feel like that's part of the strategy too, right? Is to flood the zone with just confusing narratives and overloading people so that they stop paying attention.
I think that this is very challenging question, because if I think some country know what to do, they will do this. But this is the problem, that we don't have any. We couldn't fight with disinformation very good. But in many countries, many institutions had something like the fact checking platforms, and European Union had the fact checking platforms too. Many countries in Turkey, I think that is a platform like this. In Poland we have. So look for this platform. I know that after the information, this information, they need time to check the information, to publish the comments of them. But sometimes I think that the good way is not to repost something, but wait and look what's this explanation. And sometimes I think this is more for journalists or experts. It's something good to ask the different expert, like the next anecdotal evidence, but generally it's something happened related to Poland and is connected to Turkey. Many Turkish journalists, sometimes more than one journalist in the same media, send the question for us, and we generally to send the information for this question, because this is the situation when I talk about the Polish policy, domestic policy only for the Turkish journalists. but we try to explain the information. And in this incident of drones, we don't have any question about what happened in Poland. So sometimes it's good to ask, to have many comments, to try to check the information and to wait. I think that this is important, not to very quickly repost, but to wait and to check the information, to use the fact-checking platforms. And sometimes I think the informational detox, I think this is very hard to me too, because I like the social media and the place like this. But sometimes I think this is very good to have some informational detox and to not publish very quickly, but to wait, to check.
So you ask a very difficult question because, especially when you ended the question, I was thinking that oh my gosh, this is a societal issue. And let's be honest, the three of us, of course, we have beautiful minds, yeah, of course, but we won't absolutely work out this grand scheme on how to break this vicious cycle on societal level of people overusing social media. We can, enter this Pablo Coelho mode and speak of, this cognitive, oh my gosh, when you are overloaded with the information, with the fact that, you lack focus, and when you don't focus, you can't strategize, and so on and so on. We won't break the cycle. We won't repair it. Neither we will, let's say, repair Turkey. I'm also against these schemes that are sometimes repeated, these huge strategic schemes that, that say that we should change Turkish media landscape and so on, because this is the source of the problem. Of course, it is one of the sources of the problems, yeah? But my way of thinking on going forward is more, I would say, pragmatic and more concentrated on these baby steps. As I already told you, that we should basically try to deliver the tools to some Turkish journalists. From lots of Turkish journalists in Turkey, we heard a recommendation that, well, basically, it's not the issue of the bad will. It's the issue that they, especially youngsters, lack instruments to verify some information. So they don't have mentors anymore. They don't have resources anymore. The media teams are downsized, and there is this time pressure. So let's try just to give them tools that they could or not apply, but at least they will have a choice whether they will apply it or not. Secondly, I think we should have, as let's say, the West, more strategic communication, also with Turkish society. I always use this example of Richard Moore, former ambassador to Turkey and MI6 boss. Yeah, I think he was Richard Moore, that really masterfully utilized his Twitter account, yeah, in Turkey. But look, this was something, an example of a genius. I'm speaking of genius in terms of that this was adventurous. There was this one guy that had a charisma, personal idea, and so on. We need processes if we want to be effective. Russia has processes. They know Turkey very well. They know how to play with national sensitivities again. They differentiate, as Karolina mentioned, with their narratives using the same grand narrative, but it's, let's say, sub-narratives, other sub-narratives to Africa, to Turkey, to Iran, to Iraq. Why can't we also be skillful, have processes of strategic communication with Turkish society, especially at time of crisis? This should be also on our, hands, basically, to tell the Turks the reality, basically, not leave, the field solely to Russia and its narrative disinformation schemes. Thirdly, we have a wonderful project in Poland. Karolina is running one of these projects. It is called Regional Centers of International Debates, which is basically a project that allows people in smaller cities, not only these huge academic cities, although in Turkey you only have academic cities, basically speaking, but so people in smaller cities to have contact with international relations experts that explain or speak to them about the world affairs. And to me, this sounds like a funny, tiny idea, but at the same time, taking under consideration the fact that lots of the Turks take their info about the world from these funny guys in these, shows that take, I don't know, 2 or 4 hours with 4 talking heads, sometimes with this, stick and sponge. Uh, and this is the most important source of the information. These guys saying, as you know, lots of historical things without being forced to answer difficult question from people. I think that such a program in Turkey may be really interesting. Yeah, for Poland to, for people to have this contact with scholars, with this ability to ask them questions. And honestly speaking, in Poland, they are quite effective. In these smaller cities, people gather a lot to talk with these international relations experts. So these are 3 very basic steps. And of course, there are also other like op-eds that may be initiated by, for example, Western experts explaining position in Turkey. Yeah, sometimes, and well, basically speaking or broadly speaking, or trying to synthesize it, we need more communication from the West with the Turks and Turkish society that is organized in a process and not is an adventurous endeavor.
So basically, more face-to-face communication, more process.
It doesn't have to be face to face. Why won't we utilize social media to do that? Why won't we also flood Turkish media landscape with our narrative, with the goal to explain, not to basically brainwash, as Russia usually does.
I mean, I didn't even ask you them, what is brainwashing, because you can view every message from a foreigner as brainwashing here. So
Yeah, it's just
but we're gonna leave that for the future. And I also didn't ask you about AI, which we'll leave for another talk. But thank you for everybody that stuck with us. To wrap, I've been speaking to Karolina Wanda Olszowska, president of and co-founder of the Institute for Turkish Studies, and Karol Wasilewski, head of the Turkey, Caucasus, and Central Asia Department at the Center for Eastern Studies, OSW. Thank you both for joining us. Very informative.
Yeah, look at you. You're almost Polish with this pronunciation. So
I ate kielbasa once. What can I say?
Wonderful.
Thank you to our listeners. If you missed part of this live show, you can find the full recording on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube with all the links that we referenced in the show notes. This podcast is a production of Turkey Recap, a newsletter on Turkish politics and business. If you like what you heard, visit turkeyrecap.com for more coverage from right here in Ankara. Stay safe, stay well, and see you next time. Thank you.